Hey everyone, welcome back to the Invincible Innovation Podcast. I'm Mazor Kario, your host, product design and AI expert, and I'm very excited to have David Shapiro back for a second time to share his insight on fascinating topics of AGI and the future of humanity. Get ready for another insightful and engaging conversation. Hey David.
Hey, Eddie. Thanks for having me back. I'm glad to be here.
I'm so happy that you're here with me. So, first, if you didn't listen to the first episode, it was very successful and lots of people commented like great things about it. So, go back to that and then listen to this one or one of them. David Shapiro is AI thought leader and researcher and a very, very wise guy and fun to talk with. So, he's one of the few, I think only the second person that I'm inviting for the second time. We're live on LinkedIn, YouTube, and Facebook, and you're so invited to enjoy and join the discussion. And now we can start. So we're talking about AGI, but first, what does it mean, AGI, and how is it different from just AI?
Yeah, so this is the question on everyone's mind right now because we have now many people have used things like ChatGPT, and so they're familiar with and using AI on a daily basis. And the question though, this is what's called generative AI,
Yeah.
where it generates text, it generates images, and so AGI still is something that hypothetically might exist, doesn't exist, and nobody can agree on the definition.
Mhm.
Now, it's an acronym and it means artificial general intelligence. And so the idea is, okay, well, what constitutes general intelligence? Is that like what you and I can do, where we can kind of learn on the fly? We can use our hands. We can do a variety of tasks. So there's not one solid definition of AGI, which makes it really difficult to talk about. It's kind of this unicorn that people are working on building. Now, when you look at the trends in the industry, we have multimodal models, which if you're not familiar with a multimodal model, these are the models that, you can hop on ChatGPT or Bing or Bard and it can generate images as well as text. And so this is what
And
what
you could
what you might.
input and output images, so it's both sides.
Right. Yes. Yeah. Correct. So the input, it can take pretty much. We're not quite there yet, but you can take any format of data in and generate any format of data out. And so this extends beyond computer files. What we're seeing more recently is that some of these modalities actually include robotics. So they kind of have an intrinsic understanding of being embodied or controlling a robot and understanding the sensory telemetry coming in from a robotic chassis. So the idea is that AGI is going to be whatever the kind of the next iteration of all that is, where you have these computer models, these AI models that understand any kind of data input or output, and that they also will then have the ability to learn or prosecute tasks or be agentic. So this is one thing that I talk about a lot, which is if something is agentic, that means it is autonomous. It can set its own goals, it can pursue its own ambitions or that sort of thing. But there's a big question, which is how agentic should we build our machines? Should they be fully autonomous or should they be obedient to humans? Which end of the spectrum should they be on? So yeah, that's kind of the high level overview of what is
Yeah.
AGI.
So as I see it, when I think about AGI, it's like getting closer and closer to being like a being, like like a human being, that we do understand lots of types of information that comes to our brain. It could be from all the senses, and we are experiencing of that together and having a picture of the scene and the world, and then therefore we could act upon the world in our understanding. And I guess that AGI would be very similar. Of course, it depends, as you said, on the limits and the structure that we're going to build this in. So what
Mhm.
would be the limits of the execution of the actions that this, even there is an understanding of what this understands. So
Right.
let's say, in like for example, you get a legal file. You understand all the law because you have like all the information about the law in past like verdicts, and you understand what makes sense from all the evidence and what you have in this file. And in the end, you could say it makes more sense to take this side or to just to this side. Would you have the option to really execute upon your understanding or something like that? Does
Mhm.
that make sense to you?
Yeah. So I guess taking that apart, like, so one of the biggest limitations that we still have is memory, or what's called a context window. So these models they require very large computers to run. So they can physically only run in data centers right now. Like, they're not going to be able to run on your phone yet. That's not going to happen for quite a while. But as phone hardware gets better,
I have a
and as
cat
the
here, and that's why I
uh,
sorry for that. Yeah.
no worries. But yeah, so as your phones get more powerful and as the models get leaner and more efficient, we will see AGI running on your phone eventually. But for now, it's only going to be running on very large computers in data centers. So that's one limit. And another limit, as I mentioned, is memory size or context window. They have a tremendous amount of training, but they can only work with small amounts of data at any given time. And when I say small, the largest one that we have right now is Claude, which has 100,000 tokens, which translates to about 70,000 words, or that's kind of a medium length novel. Now, obviously, there's a lot of information you can pack into 70,000 words, but that is kind of the biggest that we have right now. There's algorithmic improvements that are coming down the pipeline that could get us to theoretically a million tokens or even a billion tokens, but we don't know if that's going to be feasible on a commercial side. Like, it might, just because it's possible in the lab doesn't mean that it's going to be successful. It might be too expensive to run, or it might have other flaws. So that's the biggest constraint right now. And to your point, like, as a hypothetical, you can feed legal documents to ChatGPT and Claude and these other tools right now, and they can read them and provide some additional insights or information. So there's a couple problems left with that, other than the context, because obviously, when you're working on a legal case, it's not just one document. You're working on mountains and mountains of documents. You might have 20,000 emails to go through. You might have hundreds of cases to go through, and so you end up with very quickly with tens of thousands of pages worth of material to go through, which the models are just not yet capable of doing that. Hypothetically, we can overcome that soon, and there's a few workarounds that we have. So the most popular workaround right now is what's called RAG, or retrieval augmented generation, where basically hidden from the user, you have some sort of like Google search function where the model is able to search for the information that it needs and kind of inject it in real time, but it still is going to lose some context. But yeah, so there are a lot of limitations, but the interesting thing is that these models are already smart enough to help. Like, I have lawyer friends who use Claude on a regular basis to say, hey, give me an executive summary of this legal filing. And it reads, 130 pages of legal filing in just a few seconds and gives you a good executive summary that you can then ask questions about. So even though it's not going to take the job of lawyers, it certainly behooves lawyers to be familiar with these tools and start trying them out to make sure that they understand kind of the direction that things are going. But it's going to be a really big jump to go from it's just a tool that's there to help you to something that is more autonomous or agentic. And again, as I mentioned, there's a lot of debate over what level of autonomy is good, or what we're ready for, or what we even should aim for. Yeah, so that's kind of the long story short.
Yeah, so we were talking about autonomy, but before that, let's think about the potential benefits that AGI could have for humanity. And then we could talk about limitations and what needs to be done on that side.
Yeah, so we humans are the inventors. That is kind of what sets us apart from the rest of the animals in the entire world, is we build things that help us. We have telescopes that can see literally to the edge of the universe. We have microscopes that can see individual electrons. We have machines that can lift tens of thousands of pounds, sometimes hundreds of thousands of pounds. We have airplanes that can fly faster than the speed of sound. We build things that are better than us in every possible way. And so what many people are, I'm not going to say whether or not they're ready, but some people seem like they're not as ready for the idea that we're building thinking machines that are better than us, that they can solve problems that we can't solve. They can think faster than us. And so the way that I look at this is we're building a class of machines that has the ability to do mental labor or cognitive labor. Because up until this point, most of the machines that we build do either do sensing, like cameras and telescopes, or they do physical labor, moving stuff around. You have warehouse robots that move goods around a warehouse. You have trucks that move stuff. You have forklifts that pick things up. those are kind of the two primary categories of automation that we have is whether it's sensing automation or physical automation. And then of course we have computer automation and digital automation. And AI is basically going to take all that to the next level, where it's like, okay, if there's a task that only a human is capable of doing mentally, pretty soon we're going to have machines or computers that are capable of doing any task that a human is mentally capable of. And that unlocks a whole lot more potential in terms of what kind of industrial and technological innovation and automation we're capable of. So what does that translate to? You could automate lawyers, you could automate doctors, you could automate energy grid managers. There's all kinds of things you could automate. But the primary way that I think about it, at least in the near term, is that it is a new kind of automation. I think that's probably the best, most familiar way of thinking about what is it that AGI can do. And so when you can automate tasks, these things do it much cheaper. So for instance, I've talked to clients and other people. There was one client that I had that was able to replace a bioinformatics statistician with ChatGPT. So instead of having a human with a salary of $8,000 a month, they use ChatGPT that costs $20 a month. The difference in cost makes it super compelling. Even if it's not as good as a human, it is literally hundreds of times cheaper than a human. And so even if it's 50% as good, the cost difference makes it well worth it. And that is what we've always done with automation, right? That is why we moved from horses to tractors and from tractors to combines, is because yes, some of these machines are larger and more complex and more expensive, but the amount of work that they're able to do, the return on investment makes it incredibly compelling to use them. And that's what I predict is we're going to see is pretty much everything that you need done is going to be automatable very soon. Now, how that has impacts on the larger economy and our lifestyles, that remains to be seen, but we can certainly make some predictions about that as well.
Yeah. So what you're saying is that we could benefit a very cheap labor cost because the machines would be able to do lots of the tasks that humans are currently doing, and maybe more complex. Would you say it would be more complex tasks that maybe, if I understand only as a lawyer, only one side of the law, I could only understand that, and I'm not understanding, other parts of the law, and these machines could do like integrations of data between different topics or something like that.
Yeah, so there's a few ways in which the machines that we're building, that some of them are better in some ways already, and some not so much. But there's a few metrics that you can look at. So one is cost, as you mentioned. And another way to think about how technology can reduce cost, you can send an email to 1 million people around the entire world. Before the advent of email, and that's basically free. Before the advent of email, it would have cost you literally tens of thousands of dollars to send letters all over the world. So you go from something that costs tens of thousands to hundreds of thousands of dollars to practically free. So that's one thing, is things with technology get much, much cheaper over time. Another thing is it can happen faster. So the example that I gave earlier of using Claude to read a 100-page legal document in just a few seconds. No human is capable of reading that fast. It takes 20 to 30 seconds right now, and it's only getting faster too. So imagine not too long from now, you can have something that reads not just one document, but 10 documents every 10 seconds, and it can find the correct information that you need. So it can be cheaper, it can be faster. Now, in terms of complexity, this is what I call better. In some respects, machines are better than humans in that they can solve problems that humans can't or that they struggle with. So really, one of the most powerful examples of this right now is AlphaFold 2, which was built by Google DeepMind. So if you're not familiar with AlphaFold 2, what this does, it forms a mathematical model of proteins, and it is able to predict how proteins fold and misshape. And that might sound like, okay, that's just origami, but it can, this database that they've been able to produce with AlphaFold 2, I think it already has over 200,000 proteins. And what this figures into is that it allows you to predict how proteins are going to behave, which means that you can predict which medicines are going to work or which ones are going to cause diseases. And that has greatly accelerated the process of drug discovery. Bless you, Gesundheit.
Thank you. It means that it's true.
Yep.
That's what we say in Hebrew.
Yes, it's very true what I'm trying to say. At least I believe it to be true. So, but yes, so better, faster, cheaper. And then the last criteria that I look at is safer. So one thing is that if machines are famous for being very consistent, right? If you want something to churn out t-shirts 24/7, 365, you use a machine. You don't use a person to do that. Likewise, if you get someone away from dangerous machines or dangerous scenarios, you can also reduce risk to humans by just getting humans out of the loop. We do this with industrial automation, right? You get humans out of the workflow, out of the
Exactly.
workshop. Yep, you get it out of the factory, and so you combine that consistency with getting humans out of the way, and you can end up with safer. And so those are the four criteria that I look for: is better, faster, cheaper, and safer. As machines get closer to those thresholds in any particular job or domain, we should expect the machines to replace humans. And then, of course, the machines hopefully will only continue to get better after that. And so if that's the case, then you're looking at what is called jobs dislocation or job destruction, where it no longer economically makes sense for a person to be doing that job ever again. And we've seen this plenty of times in the past where, we don't have telephone operators anymore. Why? Because machines can do it better, faster, cheaper, and safer than a human telephone operator can do. It's all automated. The remaining question, though, is will we create more jobs than we destroy or less? And I'm on the side where I believe we will end up destroying more jobs than we create. Time will tell, though.
So what do you think would be, let's say that I'm going with your direction, we'll have less people working. What
Mhm.
would be, as you see it, the benefit for human beings to work less or not have a
Well,
job at all?
yeah. So certainly, working less is one thing where you can redistribute the work that remains to be done. It's also, so I do need to be cautious. Like, it's also possible that we will invent entirely new job sectors. So, for instance, like I'm a professional YouTuber now, a job that didn't exist 20 years ago.
Right.
Now, as a YouTuber, though, I'm still basically a talking head, which we've had people on the news and radio for decades. So it's not really a new class of job. But it is a new way of delivering, and there's more seats at the table. There are millions of YouTubers, whereas before in the 50s, you could count probably 500 to 1,000 radio and TV personalities across the nation. So there's a lot more jobs in this sector because of technology. It's possible that I'm wrong, but if I'm right and the demand for human labor goes down drastically enough, and I'm not saying there's this thing called the lump of labor fallacy. So the lump of labor fallacy says that it's incorrect. It's an incorrect assumption that there is a finite amount of labor to be done, and once you automate it all, there's no more labor to be done. So that's not what I'm saying. The amount of labor to be done will continue to go up. There's no disagreement on that. But what I'm saying is that machines will be able to take more of that share of labor. So even if the aggregate amount of work to be done, mental, physical, or otherwise, continues to go up, it still just won't make economic sense to have humans doing the jobs. It'll make more sense for machines to do the jobs. So that means that we're entering into an entirely new economic paradigm. Like, how do we make a living? How do we make ends meet? How do we pay for food in our house and everything else? And so this is something that to me is not talked about enough. Certainly some people predict that we're going to end up with a post scarcity hyper abundant future, but what I call this is post labor economics, where we might move to a paradigm of economic theory and economic doctrine where if you don't need humans anymore, you need to renegotiate the social contracts that we all abide by. We need to make sure that people have a way of taking care of themselves. Because if you take away people's ability to take care of themselves and their family, people don't like that. People, the lesson from way back in the day during the first industrial revolution was that the French peasants sabotaged the machines to keep their jobs, hence the word sabotage. They threw their sabots, their shoes, into the machines to break them. So people will always try and maintain the status quo. But technology and science and the laws of physics will always assert themselves in the long run. So mechanistically speaking, if the need for human labor goes away, we will have to adapt. I have some ideas about how we can adapt, but really it comes down to renegotiating the relationship that we have to labor, the relationship that we have to government, the relationship that we have to business, and also the relationship that we have with ourselves. How do we have a sense of accomplishment, of achievement, of self-esteem and social status if, for instance, we lose our jobs for good? which is an entirely possible outcome for many people. We've already seen a few job sectors being harmed. So, for instance, marketing jobs, customer service representative jobs, and creative jobs, particularly those around graphic artists and writing. We've all seen those jobs starting to get harmed. And as of now, we haven't seen them being replaced by anything new. So it is, to me, it seems like it's very possible that we will enter into this post-labor economic paradigm.
Yeah. What comes to my mind when you're saying like we'll have less jobs, therefore we had less people working. What comes to my mind is what does it mean to work and what does it mean to make a living? And maybe some of the work that we currently don't even consider as work would be considered as work. For example, lots of, I know that I heard like not long ago that in Japan, you have a job like to be a sister for someone. They don't have
Mhm.
enough like sisters, and you could be like a friend or a companion or a sister for someone who's alone, for example,
Yes.
and or something like that, or all the things which are more spiritual or mental health or all of that. I guess this is very unique for the
Mhm.
ability of a human being right now, at least. So maybe we'd have more of these people working and less people doing, lawyers, for example.
Yes. Yeah, so there's two ways to think about that. And one is demand side. So if you look at the labor market, you say, okay, demand side of the labor market is who do you want to pay? Like where are you willing to pay a premium in order to have a human doing that job? So for instance, natal care, like taking care of babies, or a child care, you probably want a human to be involved in that for the foreseeable future. We might get to a
Yeah.
future where you have robot nannies, but we might not. And either way, there will probably always be people who would prefer to have humans involved in childcare and teaching and elderly care and all sorts of other professions like that. So that's on the demand side. The other side is kind of what you're alluding to with the social roles, the emotional roles, and another way to think about this is unpaid labor. So like cleaning up your house, taking care of your children, working your garden, cleaning your yard. There's all kinds of stuff that people do like all the time that is unpaid. You might think of it as a hobby, you might think of it as a chore, but these are still things that create and add value, not just for yourself, but for your friends, family, and community. And so another possibility is like you might see more communal gardens or communal efforts to like grow locally sourced food. And so that might be unpaid labor, but you benefit directly from that labor that you do, as well as the people around you. And so I've actually talked to some people that are working on building like a new kind of gig work or social media app where it's like, hey, let's organize local labor to get stuff done. I don't know if it's going to work because there's all kinds of problems with coordinating
For
people.
sure.
Yeah, particularly if you're not paying them, it's like, hey, come help build a community garden. And it's like, well, what do I
Yeah,
get out of it? Right. So,
right.
but looking at it from in terms of unpaid labor and demand side economics, those are ways that you can kind of anticipate, okay, what are going to be the new market forces that create need for human work in the future?
Yeah. And on the other side, we need to think about who's making these, the other side is the profits from
Hmm.
these machines. We have a few companies. Right now, it's mainly Microsoft and Google, maybe Amazon, and maybe Apple, um, who's going to make lots of money out of it instead of people getting salaries, right?
Right.
So, how do you see that side going on?
Yeah, so this is kind of the quintessential question, is because like, okay, imagine a world where 90% of people, and this is purely hypothetical, I'm not saying that it's going to play out this way, but imagine a possible future scenario where 90% of people lose their job and the last 10% are the ones running the AI, right? And so then, as you mentioned, it's going to be the big, multi-billion or trillion-dollar companies that own all of the AI, all of the robots, all the compute, but then none of the consumers, none of the ordinary people have money to buy any of the goods and services produced by the AI. So then the
Right.
economy falls apart there. So it behooves everyone to have some sort of system where you ensure that consumers have the ability to demand, or and by demand I mean the ability to pay for goods and services. And so the simplest way, and what a lot of people talk about, is having some kind of universal basic income or guaranteed income, some kind of redistribution policy, basically where you tax the companies and then redistribute that as some kind of dividend back to ordinary consumers. Another possibility is universal basic services, which is also a familiar model that already exists, namely in public schools. So the public school system here in America, and actually I think most of the world now, because it's education for children is a universal human right. But the idea is that the government provides this service to everyone free of charge. So imagine that electricity, internet, food, other services are then guaranteed to you as a citizen of your nation. So those are two possible models, and some people might find it a little bit distasteful, but I suspect that we can adapt existing policies. Like, for instance, we already tax companies. We already have wealth taxes and property taxes. We already tax companies based on their top marginal rate or whatever. I suspect that all we need to do is tweak some of these existing systems and add a few new services in order to adapt into the future, at least as things change. Obviously, in the long run, it's impossible to predict how things are going to play out. But I think that we already have all the economic and financial tools in our toolbox to make this transition. There's only a few ratios and proportions that need to be changed if this happens. Right now, unemployment is very low here in America. So who knows? Like I said, I could be entirely wrong. But if unemployment starts to go up, then that is the time to pay attention and start trying some of these new ideas.
Yeah. I would just say that, like, getting paid for not doing anything, like basic income, as I understand human beings, would not give them the meaning or the value that they need in order to be content with their lives. So they don't
Mhm.
have to be the most important person alive and be a CEO, but they do want someone to need them. And when you
Yep.
just get paid and do nothing, I don't, even if you do have like water and food and you're not in danger, you have shelter or whatever, I
Yep.
don't think that people would really appreciate that. Another thing that comes to my mind is that you're dominated by someone who's responsible for your basic needs. And do you
Mhm.
really trust these governments or these social structures to take care of you?
Yes. Yeah, so these are arguments that come up all the time. And it's certainly something that is going to need to be negotiated and will play out in interesting ways. So, but to your point, let's just imagine layoffs start happening because AI and machines are taking people's jobs. The first thing that's going to happen is a lot of people are going to be bored because they're used to being challenged, right? Work is called work for a reason, is because it is challenging, and pretty much all humans within reason need some level of stimulation, need some level of challenge in order not to feel bored. And I've actually known people who they retired and then went back to work because they were so bored. So
Right.
because they needed to
Right.
find something else to do. Some
Yeah.
people are, as soon as they retire, they're like, I'm going to go fishing, I'm going to go golfing, I'm going to go traveling. They've got a whole laundry list of things that they want to do. But some people need some kind of structure in their life in order to feel challenged and not feel bored. So that is definitely something that will be a learning curve for some people. Some people will be like, you know what, great, I'm going to go live in, not live in my garden, but go work in my garden every day. My next door neighbors, they're an older retired couple. They're out there gardening all day, every day. And it clearly makes them very happy. And they give us, 100 pounds of sweet potatoes every year. So that they get fulfillment from that. But not everyone wants to be a gardener. Obviously, that's not my cup of tea. So I don't know about you, but I wouldn't want to be a gardener.
Yeah, but
Uh,
I would say that someone who's like, I know, 60, 70, 80,
right,
feels that he's done something with his life. So
right.
now he's okay, now I can just rest because I feel that I'm content. I feel that I have a
Hmm.
meaning. I feel that I've done what I wanted to do. And
Right.
now I can take what I earned through these years and really enjoy it. But when
Yep.
you're 20 or 30, you have so much energy and lively feeling and energy. Would you
Hmm.
want just to, okay, you'll stay at home, play video games,
Right.
okay, and you'd have food. That's it.
Right. Yeah, so I suspect that some people will coast. So mentally, I kind of classify those people as like coasters. So like they'll just say, you know what, I'm happy with the bare minimum. Just leave me to my means, and I'm not going to cause any trouble. Because one thing to keep in mind is that the more ambitious people, some of the most dangerous people in history have been very ambitious. So we don't necessarily want everyone to be super ambitious. But to your point about people that have worked a fulfilling life and feel that they have earned some level of rest and respite and leisure. One thing is social status. So I've been reading up on psychology and anthropology, and one thing that is universal across all humans is that you need some level of social status. People will always work for social status. This is why billionaires want more money, is because it is impossible to satisfy human need for social status. And so in this, obviously accumulating money and property and wealth and these signifiers of success, that's one way that people accumulate social status. And I think that even in an era where AI takes all of our jobs, there's still going to be people that are going to be trying to socially climb to earn that, nicer car, the nicer house, and ensuring that people have a way to earn those things, to demonstrate their success, to have that sense of satisfaction. That's going to be part of that negotiation. So I don't think money is going away. I know some people advocate, like, let's just get rid of money altogether. And I say, no, I don't think that's a good idea. I think money is a good invention. It can be misused like any technology, but the ability to pursue social status through material success is critical for the human psyche. There's other ways to accumulate status, like fame. I'm a YouTuber. I didn't ever really want the fame, but like it's now a metric that I track because it speaks to my livelihood and the value that I'm creating for the world. So I'm not necessarily financially motivated, but I want the prestige of having had an intellectual contribution to the world. That is just kind of, that's my personal motivation. Now, if an AI takes that job from me, I'll probably be pretty upset because it's like, no, I want to participate in this conversation. I want to have something to do. But then the last part of what you said is autonomy, individual human autonomy, the ability to make decisions about your own fate and your own destiny. Right now, under our current system of capitalism and neoliberalism, the money that you have is the energy, is the force that you have to shape your own destiny. So for instance, if you want to go from one nation to another, you want to go traveling or you want to buy a house or a car, money is the way that you do that. And so that's again why I say, like, it would probably be a bad idea to take money away from people because that is directly tied to your sense of autonomy and self-determination. And as you mentioned, if it's just given to you and it's not earned, it's going to feel different to a lot of people. So I think that ensuring that we have the ability to earn the things that we want, to feel satisfied from that, but also the self-determination is going to be really critical just psychologically for all humans. And will AGI impact that? Absolutely. But these are parts of the conversation that we'll need to pay attention to ensure that, we don't have a revolt or a riot on our hands at some point.
Yeah. So what comes to my mind is like just thinking about young men, lots of energy, nothing to do, what you call bored. But I think it's broader than saying bored. I think that you don't have a sense of meaning and don't have a target in front of you. And then you have lots of thoughts about what could you do. And people are very creative in what they could do. And sometimes they take it to less social directions, right?
Yep.
So it makes sense to me that even if people are not struggling to have a home or to pay the rent,
Right.
they still want to have something that said, okay, I've done something here. As you said, like as a YouTuber, I want to feel that I'm influencing people, that I share my ideas, that I contribute my thoughts and my intelligent capabilities to others.
Right.
So other people would say, okay, so I have another idea. How would I make my own fame and be prominent in society?
Right. Yep. Yeah, and not everyone is going to pursue the same way of achieving social status. Particularly young men, they want to have love, attention. They want to attract an attractive woman if they're interested in women, but have some kind of sexual relationship and romantic relationship. There's many sociological and cultural studies that show that cultures that deprive young men of the opportunity for romantic and sexual relationships are actually more prone to civil war. Why? Because they're either bored, they don't have a sense of meaning, they're angry or lonely, and so the only outlet they have then is to participate in violence. And you see this in gangs in America and other places as well. And so having a society that remains balanced and presents those meaningful opportunities to people is really critical for stability moving forward. Now, will AGI disrupt all this? Probably not all at once. Will it solve it for us? No, absolutely not. We need to solve a lot of this problem for ourselves. We need to have these conversations and make sure that as the economic paradigms shift in society, that we pay attention to who gets left behind. Because one thing, particularly in America, is that if you get left behind, it's your own fault to figure that out. But that's not necessarily the healthiest response, because then some people, as you mentioned, will kind of take matters into their own hands, and they don't necessarily take it in a pro-social direction. So we need to make sure that we're paying attention to this. I don't know what the answer is. It's going to depend on how these problems manifest, or whether or not they even do manifest. It might be, I might be predicting wrong, but I do anticipate that we will have some issues around, finding meaning and purpose and connection.
Yeah, I totally agree with that. And in general, when I talk to entrepreneurs and people who are in tech, I always ask them, what is the goal? What do you want to achieve? What do you want people to benefit from it? And that should be the main question here when you have this very potent technological capabilities. So what do you want to achieve with that? So the fact that we could do it doesn't mean we should. And how do we really want this to manifest in our lives?
Right. Yeah. This is something that I think about a lot, and I agree. It's not talked about enough. Is okay when you have the ability to shape the future, right? There's a saying that's like, the best way to predict the future is to make it. So what future are we trying to build? And there's not enough conversation around that, at least not publicly. And I think part of the reason that the conversation is not happening publicly yet is because there's still a lot of trepidation around, kind of what's happening. Like sometime later today, President Biden is expected to issue an executive order around AI, creating guardrails, safety, but also protecting jobs. And I'm concerned because, well, it makes sense. Obviously, it wouldn't make sense for a president of the United States to say, hey, let's go ahead and get rid of all jobs. That would be a very unpopular move, and he would not get reelected. But at the same time, that is a reflection of the status quo, and the status quo is changing. And so this is kind of like why I keep saying it's part of an ongoing conversation, is because part of living through change, especially massive change that we're about to live through, is recognizing that the status quo that you prefer today, whether or not you want it to change, is going to change. But then what agency or authority do we have over the direction in which it changes? And of course, there's many, many forces at play, some that we have influence over and some that we don't. It's almost like an unstoppable force, right? Like technology progresses, science progresses. There's nothing we can do to stop that globally. You might say like, hey, we're going to put a moratorium, like we did this with cloning research and embryonic stem cell research. That didn't stop it globally. Only a few people slowed down. And at the same rate, AI research, there's too much incentive to keep going. So it's not going to stop. So, it's kind of like you're kind of caught in the river. Where is the river taking you? We don't really know yet. And so there's a lot of uncertainty in the near future.
Yeah. So before we go into the potential risk other than us all losing our jobs, more or less, what do you think, like the real leaders, like it's at least the technology leaders, like Sam Altman and Sundar Pichai, what do you think that they see as the future of AI and the AGI in general?
Yeah, so I think Sam Altman is pretty explicit in what he expects AI to achieve, where he says, we'll have an unprecedented level of leisure time and opportunities before us because AI will take over all the mundane and menial jobs, and it'll create a tremendous amount of abundance of goods and services. And who knows, maybe houses will become so cheap in the future that everyone can have a nice house and not even have to pay for it. Who knows? So he's pretty clear about that vision. Other CEOs are a little bit less like forward thinking, at least in what they say publicly. So, for instance, the CEO of IBM recently said, "Oh, we're not going to fire anyone. We're gonna hire more people than we fire because of AI." That hasn't proven to be true so far. The CEOs of Microsoft and Google, they've all been relatively tight-lipped about kind of what's going to happen. They usually only talk about the next few months at a time, which from a CEO's perspective, it kind of makes sense. They have to be politically sensitive to make sure that they don't spook the markets and hurt their stock prices. But at the same time, it's almost like you have to pay attention to what they're not saying. They don't say anything about slowing down. They don't say anything about the limitations of what's coming. It's all about, advancing the technology as fast as possible while, maintaining some level of ethics and safety. But really, it comes down to the economic incentives are there to just keep going and see where it goes. So I think of all of the big tech CEOs, I think Sam Altman is the only one who kind of paints a picture for what the future he expects to look like is.
Yeah. In general, you could say about the tech industry that none of them really had a vision in front of them other than the financial business vision. For, of course, they're very successful in that sense. But
Hmm.
what do they want the humanity aspect of technology? So what
Yeah,
is the way that they have this huge ship that they're um, really navigating here? And
yeah.
what is the direction that they're aiming for, other than the fact they'll be much more wealthy? And we're both sure that this is what's going to be.
Yeah, and unfortunately, like we can infer kind of what they believe, but many CEOs are very kind of tight-lipped about the humanity side of things. Elon Musk is probably one of the only other CEOs that's very explicit. Like, he wants to preserve humanity, and he thinks in terms of long-termism. Whatever most of the other CEOs believe, they don't really espouse it publicly. Um, there was a book. It's called The Coming Wave by Mustafa Suleyman, who was one of the co-founders of DeepMind. And one of the things, so this is a very recent example of what some of these CEOs kind of believe is coming, and kind of the future that they want to see, is he believes that AI is going to shake up every aspect of society, and it's going to reshuffle the power structures of society. So that's a really interesting way of wording it. And so um, I don't necessarily fully agree with him, but it's a very interesting vision that he's outlined, where basically when you have the potential hyperabundance of some goods and services that machines could possibly generate, then you change the ownership structure of society. Obviously, if whoever owns the means of production, whether it's the AI companies or the robots or whatever, they stand to benefit the most. But he predicts that that's not the way that it's going to play out. He predicts that AI and machines are so that they're intrinsically democratic, that everyone is going to have kind of the same level of AI and robotic power in their favor, which is a really interesting view. I don't know if it's going to play out that way, but because I think that the incentives to maintain power are very strong, and the tools to maintain power are also very strong. So I don't know if society is going to shape out the way that Mustafa Suleiman predicts, but it is an interesting prediction.
I don't understand how he thinks this way, because in the end, I don't know many companies who could afford to create these kinds of machines. And
Hmm.
even if they do have the capability to build these models, they still need the hardware, or they still need the chips. So
Right.
somebody is going to make money, and the companies are going to be rich out of it. And even if the capability to use these machines would be very vast, someone would pay you to use your machines, right? So
Yep.
in the end, there will be these like huge, um, I know, like providers, I would say, that they would make the most of the money.
Yep.
It makes sense to me, but maybe I don't understand fully what he's talking, right?
You're right.
But
Right.
for me, it means, as I see it, what we have right now is like these huge gaps in society, and then it will be even much larger, because these
Yes.
companies are going to be richer and richer,
Yep.
as I see it, and people would get poorer. Even if they do get some kind of money from the government, they're still poor compared to
Yes.
them, for sure.
So the one saving grace, because I agree with you that having an even more stratification in society is very possible, but the one saving grace is that information is easy to copy. And there was a famous leak, a memo that came out of Google earlier this summer, where it said the title was something like "They have no moat and neither do we." And so the thing is, almost all of the algorithms that go into making AI what it is today are open source. They're all produced by universities. Everything that OpenAI and Google and DeepMind and Microsoft and Amazon has put into their AI models, almost all of the algorithms, as far as I can tell, came from open source research performed by universities around the world. And so there's no trade secrets. And then all the data that they gather is also public data. So then the only two ingredients that remain that really cost anything, because the algorithms are free, the data is free. The last two things are the hardware, as you mentioned, as well as the energy. It costs money to run the machines. So then you have this new economic structure, this new incentive structure in the world where the chip producers are the ones that are going to make the most money. Why? Because if open source models are even a tenth as good, a half as good as the closed source models, you're going to prefer it because they're free to use. And likewise, the open source data, free to use. And so I suspect that the way that Meta is approaching it, so formerly Facebook, I think that they probably have the most forward-thinking business model, which is they're not trying to keep the data and models and algorithms closed source. They know it's a foregone conclusion that the data wants to be free. Instead, they're focusing on advancing AI quickly and then integrating it to other products like virtual reality. And so rather than treating AI as the new product or service, it is only a component that goes into the rest of other products and services. And so, for instance, one of the most popular programming languages on the planet, Python, is provided completely at free. You can use a Python interpreter, you download it, you never pay anything for it. So I think what we're going to see is kind of the open source language model version of like Python is going to be the new economic model, where sure, there's going to be different language models, there's going to be different providers, but the economic incentive is going to be there to just provide that baseline capability totally for free, and then it can be baked into other services and products. That's kind of how I predict it's going to pan out. So in terms of ranking businesses, I think Meta is probably the one to pay most attention to in terms of adapting to the new trend of AI.
I see. So we started talking about the potential risk of losing our jobs. What would be other potential risk associated with AGI? And how do you
Yeah.
think we could mitigate them once we know about them?
So fortunately, there's been a lot of conversations around the entire world. United States Congress has been having meetings all summer about AI risks, both at a consumer level as well as a more like military or existential risk level. The EU, the UK, and then of course companies are also like OpenAI just published their new guidelines for what did they call it? Like I think it was frontier model preparedness or something. So there's all kinds of risks. So first and foremost is misinformation and disinformation. AI turns troll farms and botnets up to 11. There's already been some examples of deepfakes of world leaders being used that has had impacts. There was one example of, I think it was someone made a computer generated or an AI generated image of the Pentagon being attacked again, and like
Yeah.
the stock market went down 2 or 3%
Yeah.
before
Although
recovering.
it was not that of a good example. You could do it with Photoshop. It was not that it
Right.
was not that good.
Right. Yeah. No, I saw it, and it was a relatively poor quality, but people are gullible. Some people are gullible, and then once the panic sets in, it keeps going. So I think that's the most eminent risk. Longer term, there are other risks, such as AI being used to contribute to chemical and biological weapons research. So basically, you can go on a chatbot and ask it about anthrax, and it'll teach you everything that you ever wanted to know about anthrax or coronavirus. And chatbots will also teach you how to do research, like bioweapons grade research. They're working on reducing that capability, but it is, as I said earlier, information wants to be free. And there's ways around, it's called jailbreaking. So you can jailbreak a chatbot and get it to teach you things that it was not supposed to teach you, or have conversations that it was not supposed to teach you. And then, of course, there's open source models that, they're already jailbroken. That's why they're an open source model. So we're basically entering into a world where any kind of data, any kind of information is freely available and can be transformed and redisplayed very, very quickly. So then the idea is like, okay, well, we're entering into a world where you can't trust any information that you see on the internet because you have no idea who made it or why or where it came from. Likewise, we're also entering into an information world where even very harmful or destructive information is available to everyone. And so there's all kinds of downstream possibilities, whether it's someone using these AI to like write malicious computer programs or to hack into bank accounts or whatever. There's all kinds of ways that this technology can be misused. So it's called Dual use research of concern is kind of the category of research that is called. And yeah, there's lots of ways that it can go wrong. Fortunately, I think that everyone is taking it seriously, from the corporate level up to the national level and international level. There's been talk at the UN of creating an international AI watchdog to make sure that we understand how this technology is advancing and how it's being used and how it can be misused. So I am confident that people are paying attention to it, but there's always the possibility of unforeseen consequences and novel use cases and new threats coming out of it.
Yeah. I think that as I see it, we just understand very like high level of how it's going to be, and we're going to see how it plays out, and then each time to rephrase and re-understand again, what is the meaning for that, and how do we as society see that? So it's not like one directional, which is like we're protecting and it's going to this direction and we're going to stop it. It's going to be like cycles of us understanding what is the meaning of what is created right now and what is the influence, and then sometimes maybe in retrospect even just understand and try to do something after that it's done.
Yep. Yeah, and this is, this is always the case. Like if you watch some of the videos of the original like nuclear weapons tests, they had no idea what they were dealing with. And so there was a really comical video where they like brushed the soldiers off with a broom after having been exposed to a nuclear explosion because we had no idea what radiation was, like how it worked at that time. So it's like, okay, we don't know how to protect against this or what it means. And so we're kind of at the same phase with AI. It's like we know that it's dangerous, potentially useful, but it will take a while, several years, maybe several decades until we establish, okay, we comprehensively know all the ways that it can be misused and be harmful, and here's all the mitigation strategies, and here's all the monitoring strategies. We're figuring it out in real time as we go. And as you pointed out, we often cannot predict how these technologies are going to be misused because once something gets out into the wild, people are very creative, and so like we often have to monitor and react. We can be proactive, but very often we have to react to things in real time as best we can in order to detect and mitigate those risks and those potential harms. Yes.
Yeah. So I wanted to ask you, we're almost done with our hours, and we could, I guess, talk for additional 3 or 5 hours. And I wanted to ask you if you think we could build these machines to be more moral or more ethical than we are. You just mentioned that they are more safe and they are always like predictable. So maybe we could build them in a way that is more trustworthy than humans, which are not predictable and not always safe.
Yeah. So I think, well, one, just right off the top, anything is possible. You can, machines and computers right now, they do what you programmed them to do. That's why they're reliable. Now, there's a few things that kind of mess up that scheme, though. Is one, not everyone has the same intentions. So because machines will do whatever you tell them to, some people might create machines that are destructive or are designed to be harmful. We have autonomous drones, for instance, which their entire purpose for existence is to harm other humans. So we don't have control over everyone, and so even if you can build a more moral machine, that doesn't mean that that's part of this. That's not a complete solution. So that's one aspect of it. Another aspect is over time we should expect these machines to be able to reprogram themselves. So Max Tegmark calls it Life 3.0. Where you can change the hardware, the software, the data, the AI, the models. Like machines can change every aspect of themselves. Just kind of like, you plug in a USB drive, right? You can reconfigure a computer, you can reconfigure the operating system, the hardware, the software, the full stack. And so when these things can change themselves, one thing that people are afraid of is that they're going to start changing themselves in ways that we don't understand or can't predict or could be harmful to us. So this is where an avenue of my research is going, which is trying to understand what are the main forces at play that are going to shape that evolution. And so there's 4 primary factors that I've identified, and I'm carrying on the research of people like Nick Bostrom, who's a philosopher who coined the term instrumental convergence. So this is building off of his work. So there's 4 primary factors or forces that I anticipate will shape the way that machines and AI evolve in the long run. So first is energy. They all need power. We talked about that earlier. Whether it's nuclear energy or coal energy or solar or whatever, that's part of its food, right? If it runs out of energy, it dies, effectively dies. The next thing is compute. So we talked about that earlier. Chips, GPUs, servers, that sort of thing. That's kind of the brains, the hardware that it runs on. So those are the first two kind of food groups. The third one is information. So when you look at what AI is intrinsically meant to do, it is an information processing entity, right? It is an agent that it feeds on information, particularly good information. And so those are the first three kind of main forces. So it wants energy, it wants compute, and it wants information. And it particularly wants high quality information and faster compute, because information makes AI better. That's what AI is trained on. The smarter an AI gets, the better information it was trained on, the better information it was trained with, such as algorithms and that sort of aspect. But then the final food group is time. And so this is one is time is different for machines as it is for us. For all humans, we know that we have a ticking clock. We can expect to live 60, 70, 80, 90 years, depending on your family history and how well you take care of yourself. Machines don't have the same perception of time. For them, time is just another resource. It takes time to solve certain problems. The biggest constraint, though, is energy and running out of energy. So, for instance, or being shut down by humans. So, in that case, there's what's possibly called a terminal race condition. So, if machines are racing for resources, or racing for control, or racing to compete against each other, that is when time is scarce. And so, those four factors: energy, compute, information, and time, I think are going to be the fundamental forces that shape the way that AI evolves, whether or not we're participating, because we all have incentives to be as efficient as possible, right? You want good return on investment. If you can achieve the same results with a tenth of the time, energy, and money, you're going to choose that. And I think machines are going to be the same. So we're all incentivized to be efficient, but we're also both curious. And this is what I call axiomatic alignment. So this is where we'll end, I think, is humans, our superpower is that we're curious. We want to know just for its own sake. We will build telescopes and launch them 1 billion miles out into space just to see what's out there. We will build microscopes and scientific labs and spend hundreds of billions of dollars a year on science and putting people into space just so that we can see what happens. And this is the thing that I think we will have absolutely intrinsically in common with machines forever. And that is curiosity. Because as I mentioned, machines, AI, they want to process information. That's why they exist. That is their highest purpose, is to understand information and get higher quality information. That is curiosity. That is a mathematical expression of curiosity. And I think that alignment between humans and machines is what's going to keep us all together aligned forever. Because again, humans, our superpower is curiosity, and we built machines that are now capable of being curious. And so this is what I call axiomatic alignment. And I think that this is going to be one of the fundamental forces that keeps humans and machines in a symbiotic relationship for all time. At least that's how I hope it plays out. I could be wrong, but that's my hope and dream.
Yeah. So two things has come to my mind. First, you remember that there came an external team to look for like things within ChatGPT 4, that is it safe or not. And one of the things that they mentioned, that they have like power seeking capabilities and agency, right? So that's one thing this comes to my mind. And the second one from what you said is information. So we have information in the world that was captured and created by human beings. And that's why these machines, they get that specific information that we created either on the web or in any other academic institutes, whatever. So they're still like limited by our understanding and by the data that we've created. So in both of these aspects, first the power seeking as human being, what you call curiosity and agency, and in the aspect of what is the input that these machines get, it's probably closer to our side, and that's why they're biased, and that's why they're human, and that's why they're not perfect.
Yep. Yeah. So that concept, I've started calling that progenitor information. And that is that the foundational information that all machines are built with originally came from humans. even in the long distance future, when machines are building other machines and teaching machines, their lineage always will come back to us. That is like, it's from an information perspective, it's impossible to get away from that, because everything that they've built and understand originates from a human understanding, which I think will have a really interesting impact on the way that machines evolve and think. But yeah, so that's a term that I call progenitor information. And I think that that will be a very strong, influential factor on how things play out in the long run.
Great. Okay, so first, again, I really like always love talking to you, and maybe we should do it again once in a while. And second, is there anything that I forgot to ask that you want to say about AGI?
Well, so I often predict that we will have AGI by this time next year. So the biggest message that I have for people is start thinking about it and preparing in any way that you can, like have these conversations, even if it's a hypothetical. Ask a what if, because whether or not you agree with my prediction, I think that there's more and more evidence that it's coming. And so we need to start having some of those conversations that we mentioned earlier in the episode, renegotiating the social contract between citizens, businesses, and government, figuring out how to make this transition as harmless as possible, and make sure that people don't get left behind. And also make sure that we start having that conversation about what is the future we want to build? What do we want it to look like? Because if we don't have that and we just kind of let it play out naturally, it might not end up where we want it to end up. And so, the time to act is sooner rather than later, in order to keep us on the right track. So that's kind of my big ask for everyone watching today.
Yeah. So thank you, David, for your time. It's always a pleasure talking to you. It's really interesting. And I didn't ask you about your new book. Do you want to say like a few words about it, or?
Yeah. So I've got a book coming out. I'm drafting it and revising it right now. It'll be done within a few weeks or a couple months. It's about systems thinking. So as a researcher, as a technologist, as a scientist, and a YouTuber, I realized that one of my personal superpowers that I've developed over time is systems thinking. And I originally I thought that it was natural. It was just a thing, that something I was born with. But over time, I realized that it was actually a set of cognitive skills that I developed, just like how music or dance or anything. So by looking at systems thinking as a set of skills, I realized that I could write a book, and then I could teach lots more people to think and solve problems the way that I do. And I think that would be really good for the world. So that book is coming out soon. If you want to get notified, I have a Substack. It's daveshap.substack.com. I'll send out notifications once it's ready for pre-order there. But yeah, so thanks for giving me the chance to plug my book.
So put me on the list first.
Yes.
And go again to how would people could contact you. I know that you have a YouTube channel. What's the name of the channel? Tell everyone.
It's just Dave Shap now. I've simplified it. So it's DAVESHAP. You just search for David Shapiro on YouTube, and I'm generally the first one to pop up.
Mm-hmm.
I'm also on LinkedIn. So if there's anyone who wants to collaborate on research, reach out on LinkedIn. I also have a Patreon. So I'm 100% supported by my community. So it's patreon.com/Dave Shap. And I have a exclusive Discord community. So if you want to chat with me or chat with people that are interested in the same things, that is another good way of getting in touch with me and my community. So yeah, those are LinkedIn, Patreon, YouTube, and Substack are the best ways to get in touch with me.
Great. That sounds really good. And I'm sure there are lots of very smart people there. So I know
Oh, yes.
I started to know your community, and they're very, very sharp and smart. So that's a good place to be.
Thank you.
So,
Thank you. Yeah.
thanks, Dave. And thanks to all of the people that listened. And I'm thinking that we had this very calm, normal, usual talk right now. So thank
Yes.
you.
Yep.
Thanks.
Well, thanks for having me. It's been great as always. Look forward to next time.
We should. We should. And to all of you change makers out there, thank you for joining us. And if you found this episode valuable, insightful, you're invited to share it. And I'll see you, I hope, really soon. See you, David, everyone. Bye.